Welcome to the Coast Podcast. I'm Emilie, a virtual assistant agency owner who left Amazon in 2019 to build my dream.
And I'm Whitney, a freelance writer and communications consultant who never felt at home in a cube farm.
We didn't see many people paving their own ways like we decided to, so we created this podcast to talk to others who were brave enough to pick a different path. Creatives, entrepreneurs, people doing their careers and their lives their way.
Join us as we learn from them, get inspired, and show you beautiful paths less traveled.
Not every road leads to the coast, but the ones that do come with a great view. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Coast Podcast. My name's Emilie Given, and I own a virtual assistant agency in Lynnwood, Washington.
And I'm Whitney Popa. I own a communications consultancy in Edmonds, Washington that I partially run out of a place called Workhorse HQ that I've mentioned a few times. And today we are so excited to get my best Workhorse HQ friend in the booth to talk to us. And our first male guest, Richard Taylor Jr., who I stalked in order to become friends with and eventually be here today. But I saw him around town when I was riding my bike. He was always running. And then I discovered him through the Little Bipsy Instagram account. I was like, that's the guy. And then I started stalking his work and found his books for free. I don't think I've told you this part yet. You had put on your Instagram that you had free books at the Edmonds bookshop. So I went and got one of them. And then I don't think I read it yet, but I definitely read 31 Days of Power. Anyway, Richard is a phenomenal person. He is a mental health champion. He is a published author of 7 books now. He's a speaker. He's an advocate. He is a man about town. He is a honcho, according to his little parentheses in our video here today. And he is a close friend of the family at this point. So, Richard, thank you so much for being here. We are really excited to dig into your story more.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a phenomenal intro, by the way. I am not worthy of that. I did not know about the free book part, so that's actually really funny. But I can attest that Whitney did read the 31 Days of Power because she posted about it throughout her Instagram stories all of May last year. So I feel loved. Thank you for stalking me. Yes, that one random day I was in Little Bipsy. It's something about mirrors that gets me, right? Whether I have on a really nice wool coat or if I have on really nice shorts and I do all this amazing work, when it comes to the physical aspect of my body, I was like, you know what? Little Bipsy has a mirror. I'm going to show my legs off right here in these above the knee shorts that my wife got me. Boom. And the rest is history. So it has been great. Also, too, I didn't realize that I'm like the first male guest on the podcast. So thank you so much for that, too. Like, that's a real honor because I know how you all, feel so strongly, obviously, in which I support when it comes to like uplifting women in business, and you all have been so dedicated to that. So it means a lot that you all would even have me on here in the first place. So thank you so much.
Well, you're the first person that really inspired us to do a podcast because you and Whitney became friends, and then I remember we had like a actual formal meeting where we're like, hello, tell us all the things that we need to know about doing a podcast. And I think the best piece of advice that you gave us was just go for it. Like, you're never gonna it's never gonna be the right time. It's like you're always gonna have things that you're figuring out. Just do it. And so we did.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I think now too, like, because the podcast game is still growing and the field is still so big, the idea of, like this, and I think COVID too really highlighted this a lot, but you have like a lot of people that run podcasts and it seems like they just got it all together, right? And the reality is that they didn't start there. I know that some of the podcasts that I've listened to and where they started compared to where they are now, night and day, right? Even with me, it's really dope to have this booth in Workhorse now. But I'll tell you, honestly, January of 2018. When I first started my podcast, I was recording in my bedroom closet because I needed something that would create dead sound. So I was like in between my skinny jeans and my suits, like, and I hovered off this like crazy piece. And that's why I'm so big on the just do it part, because of the fact that I'm like, it was one of those things where once I got past that first episode, boom, like it felt like clockwork to me. And honestly, I can say that after having that sit down with you all and talking to you all about it, it's really felt like clockwork with what you all have been able to do with the podcast here. Just seeing you post and go forward and say like, hey, we're knocking out a stretch of episodes in this amount of time. And I'm like, I love it, right? And now, like you said, here you are, and it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And what's cool about yours, which I forgot to add in your intro because you're just like so many things, I can't fit it all in one short intro. But what I love about your podcast is it's 3 days a week, which to me, I'm like, wow. You do it all yourself, and they're little bite-sized episodes that, in your words, I'll use them here, that I really like. You gas us up in your little episodes, telling me like things I need to know. You and I talked about like grief over the holidays, but you had a couple episodes leading up to that about just like 5 tips or really digestible, awesome things that I can listen to quickly in the morning and take with me throughout the day. And the way that it makes a lot of sense that you are very involved in your church, because I feel like it's a very positive preaching to me of like, yeah, like I believe in you, go and get it. And here's my like 3 tips about this specific topic today that just are going to make you feel like you can do anything. So I appreciate you for what you're putting out into the world in so many different ways. One of the things though that I was holding on to ask you today, like if you have listened to this podcast at all, you know that I get way down the path with everybody. I forget to ask like the foundational questions of like, tell me about you, because I'm just so into, oh, I want to think about our future or whatever. And with you, the question I've never asked that I'm just completely blown away by is like, how did you go to school and then not even feel compelled to get a quote unquote real job? Like you just went straight into entrepreneurship.
So about that, there was, so it was, I originally went to school. I started off, so let's backtrack. So coming out of high school, I was a highly scouted football player. And I ended up having a heart murmur that caused me not to be able to play in college. So I lost all of my scholarship opportunities, right? So from there, really trying to pick up the pieces. I've sung vocally since I was maybe 5 years old. And I became like a really like hardcore thespian in high school. Like, I think the best depiction of me would be Chad Michael Murray from A Cinderella Story. That was me. Like standout quarterback, but also Simba in The Lion King on the stage play. And so with that being the case, music has always been like a huge love of mine. So when I first started college, I had gone under the realm of trying to do like vocal performance, but I didn't get like a ton of support there from my family. They felt like it was a pipe dream. And obviously this is before like social media was a thing, where we didn't realize that, your gifts would be put on display in such a way that it would open up so many doors, right? So people now are getting into the entertainment industry in a magnitude that was not set before, right? And this precedence that's completely different. And so I think for me, I got very discouraged with that. And then also too, like I was at a PWI, so a predominantly white institution, where I was actually the only Black male vocalist in the program. And my sound was different. And I think a lot of that really kind of, rubbed them the wrong way. And so there was a lot of issues that I dealt with back and forth that just caused me to feel like, oh, I'm gonna just drop out of this program. So I was undecided again for like 2.5 years. And then towards my second junior year of college, because I'm a 5th-year senior, no shame in my game, okay? We still made it. We got D's, get degrees, baby. So we made it out. And with that being said,
I honestly wish I would have had that attitude.
You know what?
I would have had more fun.
I had to embody it because here's the reality. Like, mine didn't happen because I was like partying or having like a good time. It was like I dealt with so much imposter syndrome, and I felt like I did not belong, right? And so with that being the case, like I just I struggled when it came to class, but also too I wasn't in the right realm. Junior year, I ended up committing myself to the communications program, and so I ended up taking a ton of journalism classes. I ended up taking a ton of public speaking courses, debate classes, and then of course business comms. So learning how business functions. It was so funny. This was like right before Instagram had come out. This was like right when Twitter was like early infancy, right? And I used to get the question a lot of like, what can you do with a communications degree? And now looking at it like 10 years later, communications like runs the world, right? Literally everything that we do comes through the form of comms. And so my idea at the time was just graduate. And then from graduation, figure out how you could get back into school to go and get your master's. And I think a lot of it had to do with influence of people around me. It wasn't a desire of mine, but I felt like it was the cool thing to do, where a lot of my friends were going back to school to get their post-secondary degree in, education or higher ed. And I felt like, oh man, I could do that. And then one day I could become the president of a university. And so after I graduated from college, man, we could talk backstory a lot. But after I graduated from college, I had a lot of things happening at one time. I was engaged to my high school sweetheart at the time. We were planning for our wedding. And Sally Mae, which was Navian, and they just turned to something else. They started knocking after 6 months. And so I was like, all right, I need to figure something out. So I ended up taking up one job for 6 months. It was a temporary position at Roosevelt University down in Chicago. It's a big college downtown Chicago. And I was hoping that it turned into a full-time position. I'd be able to stay at the college, go to school there. And then from there, I'd be able to start this like higher ed, piece. And that never happened, partially because of the fact that I was too good for the job and they couldn't afford to keep me. But then also too, I think there was one like life-altering piece that shifted me full-time into entrepreneurship. And that was the death of one of my good friends from college a few days before Thanksgiving. And that was like the huge shift for me that catapulted me into being a full-time entrepreneur. Now, granted, I got to make sure I give my dad his flowers because my dad's an entrepreneur. He raised 3 entrepreneurs. Both of my younger brothers, baby boy runs a shoe line and a clothing line. My middle brother is a full-time DJ. He travels the country doing a lot of DJ work. So my dad like raised entrepreneurs. And so I think it started there as far as seeing it. But after I lost my friend Steve to a very unfortunate circumstance, I was at his funeral and just being there and seeing so many people, just in mourning and feeling hopeless. That was the shift for me. I knew I wanted to speak. I had spoken before, obviously, from like a ministry standpoint on like the religious side, but I wanted to be able to take a message that was a little different. So taking my story of overcoming depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, and then kind of merging that in and just letting people know that they're seen and where they are. That is actually what led me into it. I didn't know what was to come. I didn't realize that it would put me in this realm of being like a full-time speaker and author, podcaster. But I knew that something was there, and I just wanted to give that to the world. That was the start for me. So I did have this small 6-month gap in between where I was working, but I was always I'm a futurist. So for me, I was like, what's the next step? Like, what's happening after this?
Yeah, I don't count that job for you. But like, so then you make this decision and then what? Like, how do you even get started? Are you reaching out to people and being like, hey, I can speak on this thing? Or like, you got to do your human design too to see how people
100%.
come to you. But like, are you magically attracting them to you and they're like, come speak at this thing? Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Not at all magically attracted. It was tough. It was so hard. So what I ended up doing was did a little research around like the who's who when it came to different organizations. I found out that there was one in particular in Chicago called the Black Star Project. They were very big on work within the Chicago public school system. And this was actually during a time where Chicago public school system was starting to phase out schools. And so we were having a lot of issues already with violence. And so you had students who would now, because their school was closed down and phased out, have to travel across the city, possibly into like rival gang territory or rival communities. And in this, right, you started to see a spike in the violence aspect. You started to see a spike in the mental health piece. And it just so happened that at the time, we had just had a huge like $100 million budget cut when it came to mental health services, right? So for me, like I'm noticing all of these different things. And so I go to the Black Star Project and I find out that they serve a lot of these different schools throughout the city. And I'm reaching out to them and I'm like, hey, like, I would love to be able to come and speak at the schools. You all bring speakers out. This is what I can provide. Like, I'll speak on my story. And that's all they were really requiring. Most of them were free. Most of them were free. I kid you all not, though. I probably spoke to close to 200 schools in the span of a year, with I'd say 95% of them being free projects. There were a few where it was like, okay, we'll pay you $75 to come out and speak, right? So I was living broke for a very long time within that. And I was going out to these schools and speaking. And I tried to be very strategic, though. One of my good friends from college, who I used to work at the front desk with, at the time was like an aspiring videographer. She's killing the game in Chicago and around the country now. But she would come out and I'd be like, look, I'll pay you $20 to just come out and record me, or I'll buy you a fried chicken dinner once we're done. Like, let me know what's up. And so it was one of those things where it helped both of us. I started to see what social media could be, specifically from like a YouTube standpoint. And so I was like, look, I'm gonna just take these little snippets and start posting them on YouTube. And then from there, what I did was I found out about greater programs within like the collegiate realm. When you talk about student government or TRIO or Gear Up, so many different programs that would typically bring speakers out. And in that, I just started like sending out like cold emails. I found email addresses from different folks from different conferences that maybe I didn't get a chance to sit in as a vendor. But in that, literally having to like put these pieces together, I would go to a host of networking events, right? So a lot of my work was free. I'm actually thinking about writing a book on this soon, called Free to Five Figures, which essentially kind of talks about this realm of like going from free to like, commanding 10,000 at the minimal, on a speech. Like, but this idea of like, there was such a process in between that. And there were many times that I wanted to like give up within that, because I felt like I was constantly just giving. And I wasn't getting a lot of yeses back early on, right? When I shot those emails out and I had my little video snippets in there, I didn't get a ton of yeses very early on, but there were a few people who took a liking to what I did. And from there, that was the start. We fast forward to November of 2012, which is when I wrote my first book, Unashamed. And that actually happened somewhat on a whim, because I've never been like a writer, essentially. But with that, that shifted a lot too, because it was like, wow, like you're creating this work. And then I went back to my old high school. They didn't have a mentoring program at the time. So I ended up running a male mentoring program with about 400 to 500 young men that we saw from a span of like 5 years. And these were kids from like all over the city. So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because at the time, the reading levels for many of our high schools were at the third grade reading level, third or fourth grade. And so when I dropped that Unashamed book, these young men kind of set the precedence for me, because as I gave them the book to read and we kind of went through it, they started getting back into a lot of literature in school and out of school. And one of the big things that I always heard was like, man, like reading this really got me back into a mode of wanting to read. I hadn't read a book since I was in like sixth grade, because none of the stuff really related to me. And so it was a mix of all of that. But all of it, if I could like clump it into one thing, it really came down to investment, right? So yes, the idea of like having the vision, seeing the thing before you see it, but then also too is like, yo, like one of my favorite passages from the Bible is faith without works is dead, right? So you have to put some leg work behind what you're believing in. And so for me, that's really what it boiled down to, was like, even though I don't see it right now, even though it's not making sense, I am going to continue to work and believe that what I'm sowing into is going to be good ground that's going to eventually reap some kind of harvest, some kind of benefit. And it took a long time to see it. I'd say about 5 years is when I really kind of started getting into a groove. And then right after that, boom, I moved to Seattle. So I had to start all over again.
So, what I want to talk to you about, what your experience in what you said your experience with depression, anxiety, suicide attempts made you want to become a speaker, but can you elaborate on that? Like, what in your life was so significant that you said, I have to speak about this. I have to tell other people that they aren't alone. Like you said, like that's, I've had a lot of trauma in my life too. And, my highest self is to become a speaker and an author as well. And the message that I want to relate to people is you are not alone. No matter where you're at, you're not alone. And what I want you to talk about, if you're comfortable, like your experiences and what made you want to share that message with people.
100%. So backtrack to sixth grade, which was the first time that I got bullied. My mom and dad had just transferred me out of a private Christian school into my first public school, right? And so Chicago has like a huge roasting culture. Like, y'all think roasting is something on Comedy Central. It's nothing in comparison to like being like in the hood and just sitting on the front porch. And we will literally find anything to joke about and roast. And so it started off like that, coming into the space of that school. But it transitioned really quickly into like more malicious intent and bullying. And so from the bullying, I didn't realize it at the time, but I started having these thoughts of like, well, man, what is it going to look like when I walk into the school today? What is it going to look like when I come into the space today? And not realizing that that was like the first like introduction to anxiety, like me being anxious on, am I going to get picked on today? Are the cool kids going to talk about me? Is the girl that I had a crush on at the time, is she going to like roll her eyes at me because I'm being talked about by the cool kids in the same class? And then from there, like I started feeling this like immense amount of sadness, right? And so that started leading over into depression. And then halfway through the year, I had one incident where I got like bullied. I got my Pokemon card stolen from me that day, and I was like crying on the school bus, like angry. And I remember like, one of the kids saying like they were picking on me because of my weight, and I didn't know how to defend myself at the time. And so when that happened, I kind of had this thought, trigger warning too. I just want to make sure I put that out there real quick for anybody listening. But I had this thought where I was like, well, man, maybe if I just lose some weight, then everything would be okay. They would like me. They wouldn't pick on me anymore and we'd be good. And then I said to myself, well, like, what if I could just cut some of the fat off of my body and everything would be good? That was actually the start of self-mutilation for me, which over the next few years, even though I had transferred out of that school, my parents put me in a martial arts class. I've been training for years now, but I like to keep a nice profile, so I don't really like share that part of me. But with that being said, though, even though all of those like pieces were put into place to like help me defend myself and all of that, the one unmet aspect was the mental health side. It was the fact that the bullying led to me being depressed, that the fact that the door was now open through self-mutilation. So even though things started changing throughout high school, where flip the script, I shoot up in height to about 6 feet tall. I lean out. I become this like standout athlete. I'm like a full-on ladies man. Like, I kid y'all not. See, y'all get the good stuff from me today. I don't really share this part with people, right? I went to an all-boys Catholic school my freshman year. And then my mom and dad transferred me out the next year because they couldn't afford the tuition. And it was kind of like a buffer because they were trying to get me into this particular college prep, right? And they got me into it. The first 2 months, I had 11 girlfriends, right? I know our generation and the one coming up under us uses this terms, they belong to the streets. Like, I legitimately belong to the streets. Like, I was out here for any and everything, okay? And Emilie, I know we're laughing and joking about it now, but the reason why I bring this up, though, is because I didn't realize how much relationships played a huge part into the mental health piece for me, from a standpoint of validation, from a standpoint of feeling accepted and feeling a belonging, right? And so the whole concept of belonging to the streets was actually just feeling like somebody actually wanted me, cared about me, thought I was worthy, right? And so all of these things combined, so it shifted because the one who used to be bullied had now become the bully. Right, I thought I was better than everybody else, right? Like, I carried my head held high. I was walking around with the rest of the jocks in the school. I was that. And so, like, I was homecoming king with it. The homecoming was still a month out, and they had voted me king already. I'm like, what? Like, I'm on top of the horse. Like, I'm on top of the hill. We good. And I got a chance to see the mental health piece from a different side, which was, instead of being the underdog, what happens when you are the favorite? And even as the favorite, still dealing with it. And as the favorite, it kind of took a different shift of, now I'm in a space where, even though I'm the favorite, one of the things that people didn't know about me during that time was that I lacked, in my mind, purpose. Why am I here? What's the purpose of living? Like, I'm no good beyond being this in a relationship or being this on the field, or people want, oh, just sing for me real quick. Like, I felt like I felt like a one-trick pony, or like just kind of like a minstrel, so to speak. And so with that happening, I think it gave me at the time, not realizing it, but I think on the back end, coming out of college and then having to deal with deeper mental health stuff there, because by that time I was like highly suicidal. And I had one attempt in particular, January 21st of 2008, where I took a blade down my wrist 5 times where the word love now sits. And so this one in particular almost took my life. And I think coming out of that, few years removed, going through therapy, having to like really figure life out, finding my identity, I got a chance to realize that in that space and time that I'm not the only person that feels like this. Like well over 7 billion people across the entire world, right? And we all carry emotions. We all carry feelings. And that's, I think, what really pushed me and catapulted me into that space of like, you got to talk about this. Like, you've got to be able to be bold and just, if for nothing else, let people know that they're not alone. And I'll be honest with you, Emilie, like, it wasn't easy very early on. I remember outside of like the free speeches, because I really had to like navigate the conversation carefully when I was doing this stuff for like Chicago public schools, because it was a lot of, you all call them like grade schoolers, middle schoolers. We just call them grammar schoolers back at home. But it was a lot of kids essentially, right? You're talking 4th through 8th graders, right? So being able to kind of curate that conversation in a way where it's digestible for them, but then like being in spaces with high school students, which was actually like my real first paid event. That's where I really got the push to do it. And I remember when I thought I was going to do it, I got some like heavy pushback from my dad. He kind of had this whole idea of like save your ass to save your face type of thing, right? And so like you don't share these types of things with people. And with that mindset, like I was back and forth with him a lot. And there was this one particular speech in October of 2012 that I had where after I had gotten through speaking, it was about 500 high school age students. I had like a confirmation moment, and it came from after like all 499 of the 500 shook my hand, gave me a hug and all of that. There was one person in particular that waited for me for about an hour and a half. And as they waited for me, I finally got a chance to catch up with them. We sit down at a round table. They hand me a piece of paper, and as they're talking to me, I'm opening up the paper, and they're saying to me while I'm opening up the paper, I was going to leave this with my parents when I got back from this conference, but I realized I don't need it anymore because of the fact that hearing you makes me understand that there's still more life to live, and I want to give this a try. Come to find out, it was their suicide letter. And so in that, like, that really like hit me hard because of the fact that the very thing I was fighting against when it came to like my dad's idea of like what happens in this house stays in this house ordeal, no snitch. But I'm like, in me sharing this story, like somebody else is giving life a second chance and realizing that there's more to live for. And so with that being the case, that was like confirmation that really got me to be like, no, you need to share it because there are more people out there like you and like this individual.
Well, one, you're making me cry.
Yeah, I have goosebumps.
Um, yeah, that's kind of my whole thing too. I struggle a lot with imposter syndrome, and also like being seen is huge for me because I grew up in an abusive household when I was a child. So like being seen wasn't safe. And so for me, like my highest self wants to be that author, be that speaker, but it's not like I feel like I have to shrink myself down, and like the inner child in me is like, no, don't do that. You can't do that. But on the flip side, it's like, okay, well, so many other people have experienced that kind of trauma in their life. And if you can just help one person, like just one, even though likelihood is you help many, then you have to do it. It's like a disservice to others to not do it, to not share that with other people. So yeah, it's this is also confirmation moment and validation for me as well.
Love it. I would say this too, Emily. It's not only that, it's a disservice to people. I think too what it is that it's actually going to be like somewhat of a saving grace for people from the standpoint that you in the field now, specifically what they would identify as self-help. I don't look at this work as self-help though, just because of the fact that I feel like there's a higher component there for sure. But that being said, though, you have so many people in the field now who really don't carry a story, but they see the monetization aspect of it, right? Like the industry of self help has grown immensely in 10 years, right? Like we're in the billions now, and pretty soon it'll be headed to the trillions, right? And in this, though, when you kind of like separate the wheat from the tare, what you tend to find is that a good majority of the individuals out here don't really live what they talk about, right? Like they are one way on stage, they are one way once the camera comes on, and they are completely different. Or you get people who are eager to talk about something that they have yet to actually overcome or carry any true understanding or value from what they've experienced, right? And I share that because I just want to encourage you with that thought too, of like, you'd actually come out and be an individual that would be heard from a space of authenticity. And I think that's what people are starting to recognize now, is that when a lot of folks come up, like you can start to tell who's real and who ain't, right? Like bad grammar, good theology, right? You can tell who's real and who ain't. That's just me. I'm gonna keep it real with you. And so with that being said, though, I think that you carry that, right? You carry a realness and an authenticity that people can really gravitate to and relate to, right? So the same way with the podcast, I'll share this with you, in the same way with the speaking and the writing aspect. Like don't wait. Like you got to get to it, because here's the reality. Like time waits for no one, and there are certain people that I believe are connected to our stories and our journeys that need us. And it's almost like trying to save somebody from falling off of a cliff, right? You only got so much time with that hand grip while they're dangling to pull them up, right? And so in that, I just want to encourage you, like, keep pressing forward with it and do it.
Okay, so that's a lot. So, yeah, I mean, I've had it on my mind for a long time to, you do coaching for speakers as well. So we'll chat. I'm super excited about it.
I just wanted to gas you up really quick and tell you that it feels to me, just hearing all you're saying, like you were up against so much, especially being in the Black community where, you've said yourself, like, these conversations are not encouraged, that it almost feels to me like it was a calling, like in your body, that you could not say no to, or it would have ended badly for you. That's a lot of what I'm gleaning out of this. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Emilie, but I was just perfect. Like, wow, sometimes we just cannot resist what's calling to us any longer. And I think it's a huge act of faith that you did it the way you did too, and believed in that vision, however you define your higher powers and all of that. And you're very honest about yours. And it's just so cool to see. Like, I think we all need to remind ourselves and see examples of faith in action.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Whitney.
Okay, Emilie, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I don't even remember what I was going to say. I'm just super happy that we're all here. Richard was saying, like, what were you saying about people being in our lives? Some like people being in our lives for a reason. Like there's definitely like what do you call it? Like a destiny element here between all of us.
Synchronicity.
Yes. It's like
it's divine, yeah.
It is divine, and it feels like you can really feel that. Like ever since Whitney had mentioned you when I first met you, I'm like, oh, this guy. Like, and so Whitney felt that way toward you too. Like she stalked / manifested this friendship, and it was, yeah, it's just really great. It is so beautiful to me that you can just go out and meet someone who's going to completely change your life. It's anywhere. You could just go out one day and totally meet someone who's going to change the trajectory of your life. It's pretty cool. Anyway, I don't know. I'm super excited that you're here.
Sorry if I threw too much on you right there, Emilie. I'm a firm believer of giving people their flowers, though, right? And when you have an opportunity to speak life into somebody. So my bad if it was too much right now.
No, it's good. It's good. I had a question for you. So when you decided you're going to speak And I've had this thought as well. Decided you're going to speak about X, Y, and Z, depression, anxiety, um, suicide attempts, overcoming this. Really, it's resilience, right? You're speaking about resilience and bullying and trauma and things like that. Did you do? I've had this thought where it's like, oh, I should really deep dive into like the mechanism of trauma and like what that looks like and like the really, I guess, the scientific question. Do I need to understand it from a really broad perspective to be able to speak on it? Did you do that for depression and anxiety? Did you like go down this hole of really learning exactly what it is and how to speak on it, or do you just speak in a place from your experiences? Like, is there a balance there? What do you do?
That's a great question. I think it's a mix of both, actually. And so I'm a firm believer that we're the experts of our own experiences, right? And so with that, obviously, experience carries a huge piece within the work. But then also, too, I think gaining an understanding of that experience. Because it's one thing to like know that you experienced it. It's another thing to like apply some level of like knowledge and wisdom to said experience, right? And so that was a part of it. But then the goal too beyond that for me was the fact that like I am to I think every possible degree of the phrase keep it simple stupid. I embody that, right? And the reason why is because of the fact that I think for a long time, like trying to understand it, like even when I was going through therapy, intensive therapy after my suicide attempt, like the last one and all of that, like it just didn't make sense, right? And so for me, I've always been the keep it simple type, like make it make sense. That is literally me. And so I'm like, I know that there are people out there like that. Henceforth, the subtitle of the 31 Days of Power book, A Simplified Approach to Everyday Mental Health. It was this idea of saying, like, hey, if this is trauma and this is how it's typically defined, let's break it down in a way where you can simply understand it, right? So whether that comes from the fact that you carried a level of experience in your life that dealt with maybe abuse or depression or being bullied, or whether it's something like COVID where, you know, one of the forms of trauma talks about this like rapid change that your body and your mind can't respond to in as quick of a moment's time as the change is happening, right? But in that, bringing it down to a space where it's so simple that even a child could understand it. And so that was my big practice of like, yes, study, yes, read, yes, learn. But then also, I don't just take my experiences, I take the experiences from the individuals that I've been able to serve and work with as well, which over the last 10 years has been well over 100,000 people, right? And so there are some stories that just stick out more than others. And I'm like, from this, I was able to, I'm a storyteller at heart, but I do like to be able to take and glean from those moments with people and those experiences. I also worked with a social and emotional service learning entity out of Chicago called Ada S. McKinley for about 3 years. And during this time, it was essentially a lot of like behavioral health work as an MPH. And so I did that. And that really gave me an opportunity too, because I was working at the time with young black men from the age of like maybe 10 to 15, 16 that really did not understand their mental health and that did not understand their response, like what they were doing at the time and what they were going through was actually linked into it. And so I think in just noticing the fact that there was that gap where people could not frame it or people could not understand it, I was like, they're not the only ones. And so I think too, when you talk about just us going through trauma, our minds become so clouded, our beings become so clouded that you just need it to make sense. And so that was my approach. I was like, I always want to be able to bring it into space that makes sense. So that's my experience. That's the experience of others. That's being able to turn that and frame that experience in a way that's digestible. But then it's also being able to take like the framework from what we've known from the mental health field and now being able to kind of put it in this space to where you combine that and you create something that it can be served on a plate for anybody.
So you're saying I don't need to go get my like PhD in trauma counseling?
Here's the reality. I'll say this, right? And I do a lot of work with a lot of mental health professionals throughout the country. I now sit on the board of directors for the National Alliance of Mental Illness out here in Washington State as well. And so, kind of being just plugged into that space. One of the things that I've always been a firm believer of, but I think as my work deepens, it shows me, is that there is a needed space for education and a needed space for experience. And I think those two together, what they do, Emilie, is bridge the gap. Because here's the reality. You got a lot of folks who are educated in this space, but they lack a level of empathy because they've never actually had to walk through it or live through it. You also have professionals who, while they're educated on it, they've experienced it, but they haven't been able to overcome it, right? And I think there's a beauty when you talk about individuals that while they might not be book educated on it, they're life educated on it, and they've been able to overcome, and they serve a purpose in being able to help those professionals as well. And if you can link those two together, I think what we're starting to see now is this space of what we're calling like a community-based approach to mental health, where therapists, mental health professionals, counselors, you name it, they have been overworked and completely burnt out even pre-COVID, right? And so now the idea and the talk is well, what happens when we can bring community folks into the space who've lived through it, who can essentially be poster children to be a greater example that maybe we can be. And so to your joke there and to your point, I think you got enough with what you currently have to be able to start some groundwork there for sure.
What's so interesting to me too is that I've always had this dedication to myself of, especially when social media came out, of like, if I just want my story to help one person, if me sharing this, like, I never, and you and I have talked about this a lot, like I've never understood just talking about my life in its wholeness is like brave. And people tell me that a lot, like, oh, you talk about mental health, and I'm like, isn't that just like part of life? So I think what you're doing that's so powerful to me is really normalizing that conversation. When I share stories about my life and things that I've gone through, I share it with the intention of like, it's healthy for me to get it out of my body. And I'm a writer and a storyteller too. So I just love to do it. But I also hope that, like Emilie said, sharing this thing that I went through is helping somebody else feel less alone, whether it's about grief about my dad, or that I can hold dueling realities in my brain of like, I love my children, but sometimes they're demons. I just want people to feel seen. And what you're doing is that times like 10 million%, because not only are you doing it for like different communities that aren't talking as much as others, but you're doing it for men, and you're just out there like being like, yeah, look at me, I talk about all of it, and it's cool if you do too. Because for so long it was not cool, like as kids we thought, I just look and act a certain way and I'm gonna fit in, and that's a lot of like undoing that we're all doing collectively, which people don't even realize. Like you were talking about going to school, you're absorbing all of these things that you don't even realize are impacting your mental health in such a big way. And when you were talking about your Pokemon cards, like it's kind of a funny story, but it resonates so much. Like, oh yeah, I had so many instances like that growing up where you realize like, oh, I've been holding that in my body like for the past 30 years of this lifetime. And I just cannot underscore enough how important your work is. And especially here, like that you're taking all this knowledge from life lived mostly in Chicago and just like being in Washington. I even had to tell you, like, please don't move into Seattle because your work is more powerful here in this small town 20 minutes outside of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's something about being a fish in a pond here that I think could actually stretch to Seattle at some point, which it is. But that's the thing. I'm like, I don't necessarily need to live there in order to like do the work there. But yeah, I think for me, at its core, like that's what it should be, right? Like let's normalize these different things, right? Whether it's our mental health, whether it's talking about the struggles that we have as parents, and how like sometimes, yes, we want to DDT our children, give them a little quick choke slam, and then kiss them at the end and be like, hey, I'm sorry, I love you, right? Whatever it is, like we need to be able to take the cloak off that we wear, because at the end of the day, and Emilie used this word earlier, it is a disservice, right? When we aren't honest and real, and when we can't be our true, authentic selves in that regard, we are doing ourselves a disservice. But then also too, like, you just never know. Like, it could be, and here's the dope part about it. Like, these mental health conversations don't have to be like all super deep and like aha. It could just be like a kickback, right? But in that moment, that level of honesty, and in normalizing it in that moment of honesty, what you do is you give this space of freedom to the next person that they didn't even know that they need, or maybe you didn't know that, whatever the case might be. So that's what it should be, right? But I think to your point about what we are essentially deconstructing, like, you got to consider how much time it took to build that construction up. And I think too, this is why I always tell folks, like, show yourself grace. Like, deconstruction takes time, right? Like, reframing thoughts and perspective, it takes time, and it takes us being willing to be committed to that time in order for us to see it through, first within ourselves and then next with others.
How do you take care of yourself with all the work that you're doing? Because it could be heavy.
Oh, facts. Absolutely. I'm a bum at heart, and I mean, let me backtrack, because I'm a very hardworking person. But at the same time, I have learned, and I think if I could ever say, like, what was one positive thing that I took from COVID, it would be the fact that, because I've always, definitely once I got into the realm of my work, been a really high level mover, always needing to be active, always needing to do something. COVID definitely put me in this frame where I had to slow down, and not even slow down, but it put me in a space where, like, there was nothing to do. So it wasn't like I was forced to slow down from a standpoint of like, oh, my body's telling me. It was kind of like, oh, the world's stopping. So as of now, got to figure something out. But in that, though, the last 2 years have really been a great space for me to just really take more care and time for myself. So obviously, like, working out is a huge piece for me. That's part of the reason why I run every day. And even incorporate, like, I used to be big in weight training. That's why I'm like reincorporating some of those pieces. But then also too, I am big on community. As an extrovert, personally, I am fueled up a lot of times by being around my people, by having conversations, whether one-on-one or in big group, doesn't matter, right? Like, people interaction does something great for me. I'm an advocate when it comes to journaling and being able to just like write down thoughts and stuff. That way I'm never like allowing my brain to take in too much and holding too much, and then having that kind of start responding as stress to where it becomes like negative and ugly later on. Movement is huge too. So for me, it's not always a thing of working out, but like just sometimes getting out, being about around. I've always been a firm believer that, you should definitely invest into activities that are productive. And the reason why I put productive out there, some activities can be fun, but I think at a later date we realize that they weren't necessarily productive, i.e. addictions, or maybe things that have become distractions or temptations that we struggle getting out of, right? And so productive activities for me, I just took my Christmas tree down last night, right? And so like productive activity, I see y'all laughing at me, but
we are recording on February 24th.
Yes, we are. But I just took my tree down last night, and with that being the case, like the Christmas holiday season, the movies, the lights, all of it, those are like little things that bring me joy. So what I've started to do is like spot and identify those like areas that bring me joy as a piece of self-care, right? It was so funny early on, I was doing different practices of self-care when it came to the physical aspect of like going to the sauna hut, being able to go to like the Pilates spot that we go to, right? But now like there are days where I just do it just because like it fills me up. I'm a boater too, and so for me, I'm a part of a boat club. So typically once the weather warms up, I spend a immense amount of time on the water, whether that's with people. Some days I'll just work from the water. Like if I'm working on my next book, or if I got to type up a blog post, or if I will literally do that from the place that feels subtle and so relaxing to me. Those are just a few of the self-care practices that I can think of off the top of my head. But then also too, like reading is big, podcasting, whether people know it or not, like those are forms of self-care when you just talk about keeping your brain sharp, keeping your mind going. And then, of course, too, like family is another self-care piece for me, which obviously mine live back in Chicago. So we're 1,500, almost 2,000 miles away from each other. So when she's not in school, I do spend a good amount of time with my wife or, very close friends that I have out here. Those are the fuel up moments for me. And I think that everybody's looks different, but whatever it is that's productive, I always encourage just engage in it. I love homes. I love architecture. So I'll drive around Medina or I'll drive around Bellevue or Kirkland and just look at houses and get a chance to see like how people's brain function works. And then of course too, like I always like being able to come down and sit next to the most beautiful face in Edmonds, Washington, which is Ricky Bobadilla at Santa Fe. And that's a form of self-care for me too. Had to throw that in there. Sorry.
I thought you were going to say me.
I thought you were going to say Whitney too.
But I will accept because it is just a very beautiful face.
Well, it's a mutual best friend, so it still connects Whitney and I. Technically, it still connects us. So that's why I was like, yeah, I'll just throw it out there.
I was just going to say, so thank you for being here. I don't want to wrap it up. But I feel like we could talk for 10 hours. If we wanted to, we will definitely have you back. But at the end of this show, we like to wrap up with rapid fire questions, quote, quote. They usually are not rapid. Whitney and I are essentially very long-winded, so you can be as well. And so we're going to ask you some questions and you can answer them. First question, what are you proudest of in your business right now?
Very good question. What am I proudest of? From a business standpoint, I just got all of my 1099s in. And from a business standpoint, I'm proud. You know what? Sometimes you got to talk your own ish, right? Like I am proud of the fact that 10 years ago when I first started this thing and couldn't fathom a dollar, and now like looking at the numbers that were put up from 21 and then even seeing how 22 is already starting, I'm proudest right now of the actual growth and development, which I think speaks to just the one thing of like not just having the vision, but actually putting in the work to see it through.
You can say abundance.
Abundance too. Yeah, absolutely.
I got some abundance out of my calling, like as you should.
Oh, facts. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I just dollar bill, right? Like that for me, I'm like, that is great because you realize how much you've put out there from a financial standpoint. So yes, like the overflow, the abundance, I'm like, we living to see it happen. And that's something that I'm proud of because like I said, there have been many moments and times where I was ready to just throw in the towel and be like, yep, you know what? I suck. This isn't working. I'm never going to be good at this. So, yeah.
Confirmation. Again, so good. Tell us about, I'm sure you can answer this question of very many ways. Tell us about a book you read or a podcast you listened to that changed the way you're thinking about your life or your business.
That is a solid question. Book that I've read, podcast that I've listened to. I have one right here. Austin, I think it's Austin Kleon or Austin K. Leon. He had a book called Show Your Work. And it was so dope because he's got a few books. So Austin Kleon, the first book that I read of his was called Show Your Work. And in this book, he's an artist like by trade, but this idea of like being able to, as an artist, paint a picture and then from there create a post on Instagram under that picture, and then from that post on the caption being able to create a blog, and then realizing that, hey, I could probably go a little deeper than this blog, and from there adding a few hundred extra words, and he's created a chapter, and all of a sudden he created this book, right? And so he did that in this Show Your Work book, but in it though, like the idea of like you don't have to make it complicated. And this was a struggle for me very early on. I read this book in particular by him years ago, and it was during a time where imposter syndrome made me feel like if my books weren't a certain length, then it's not good enough. If I don't sound like this person, then I'm not good enough. I feel like the Show Your Work book really was one of those things of like, you're good enough being you, master being you. And that really helped me a lot.
I just added it to my list.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes too, yeah?
And I'll link the article that I wrote that featured Ricky so everybody can see his face.
I want to see his face. I want to see his face. I don't know.
Listen, March 21st, you're going to be able to see it all the time.
It's a gift. Yeah.
This is my favorite question. Ready? What would your last meal be?
For PG references, I'm going to just give you a legitimate food answer. It would be... Emily, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot.
We have an explicit rating. It's fine.
Yeah, you know.
But that's amazing.
Richard carries different titles. People literally like call me different versions of Richard. You know, Ride Along Richard when you're on a boat with me. Raunchy Richard is what many know me as. Righteous Richard on Sundays, right? But we all over the place. Anyway, either way.
I thought he was going to go with Dick, actually. Does anyone go
That's what
yes.
we you know... I do sometimes actually go by that because I've been called. That was a part of the bullying early on. I was like, you know what? Let me own this. But then I didn't really care for it because I'm a junior, so my mom calls me Little Richie. And then so my friends got a hold and they start calling me Little Dick. And I was like, you know what? I don't really care for this conversation anymore.
Yeah, that makes Shitney not sound so bad.
Yeah, you know, going through life, just being, hey, what's up, Little Dick? Like, all right. You know, like, do I turn myself into the second now instead of junior? Like, I don't know. But I am a pizza aficionado and connoisseur. So the last meal would be some form of Chicago style stuffed deep dish pizza. Sausage and pepperoni. That's all I need. Ride me off into the sunset.
I've never had a Chicago pizza. I've never been to Chicago. But
you ain't even got to go to Chicago. We can literally go to University Village and go to Delfino's. And I can...
Okay.
Come on, we got a lunch date coming up for work anyway, right?
Let's do it. What's the best business purchase in the last 6 months that you've made under $100? But you can fib about this if you need to. It's fine.
Best business purchase made under $100 in the last 6 months. God, that's a good one, Emily. What have I... So because she posted it the other day, I would joke, and I don't think it was 6 months ago. I think I've had it longer than 6 months. But Whitney made reference to my ring light game the other day, and I have a laptop ring light, so I would throw that out there. Oh no, I know what it is. So I've been trying to whiten my teeth. I got a Crest teeth whitener with the little thing that I have to sit in there with for like an hour each night, and I'm definitely trying to get that smile back. And then I need to reclose. I had braces at one point in time. You wouldn't be able to tell with this Michael Strahan gap in my tooth right now, but you know, that teeth whitener, because once these masks come off, I'm telling you, it's gonna be a different world. Edmonds gonna be in for a hot boy summer, okay?
I'm on the same journey with the teeth whitening. I have like some organic one that I'm trying because the Crest ones, they're too sensitive for my teeth.
So it's so funny that you say that because you know my wife is everything natural, everything organic, and this is the only thing that I have that isn't.
Yep.
She has one that she wants me to try from a natural brand, and I was like, all right, well, let me just get through the Crest because I was kind of hoping I could like rush the process. If this don't work, then I'm just getting veneers. So when you see me and if I'm acting brand new, you know why.
Your teeth look great, actually. And the last question we have is, what's lighting you up lately? Besides your literal Crest blue light thing.
I would say just the shift in seasons, right? Like, obviously, we know the spring is coming. You can look at a few of these dead trees.
Wait, what?
Yeah, you know.
It snowed today.
That's fair, but I run 6 days a
This
week.
is Richard's faith again.
I run 6 days a week, and so for me, like, I pay attention to the trees that I run past, and I'm like, oh, like, is that a baby leaf budding? Right, that lights me up from the standpoint that I'm like, man, just forward progress. Like, spring is coming, but I think the spring is coming. Obviously, time has to continue to move forward. The other piece to that that's lighting me up with that is that I feel like, hopefully, prayerfully, we are moving into a space of, just like deeper community, right? Like, with like mandates being lifted, a lot of the colleges that are reaching out to me want me in person, right? And so, like, the idea that we are literally springing forward and hopefully springing forward into what will be a good, like, reconnectivity, or reconnection, I should say, in community and with people, and that makes
What a
me happy.
beautiful metaphor. I love that.
And also a little note about taking a minute to stop and notice the small things, like the budding leaf. I love to do that, and I'm such a nerd about it, especially in this town. Take our daughter, and we smell the roses very actively.
I like that. Okay, finally, Richard, where can people find you?
Everywhere, but specifically, richardtaylorjr.com is my website. Instagram, and I know I can already feel Whitney, like, rolling her eyes internally, even if she doesn't do it in person. I was not lucky enough to be able to have a name that would go through all of the social media platforms. Some of them were already stolen. So Richard.Taylor Jr. on Instagram, Richard L. Taylor Jr. on Facebook and LinkedIn, and then at Truly Taylor Made on Twitter. And then, of course, if you're local, I know we got some local folks that listen in, typically between Workhorse and somewhere in Edmonds.
I just realized I've totally seen you at the beach in Edmonds. I'm pretty sure, like, recording podcasts from one of the benches. Have you ever done that recently, like in the past 6 months?
No, I can't
Not
say that
6
I
months.
have. I mean, I'm on the benches. I use them to work out, but I've never recorded podcasts from there.
Maybe you had headphones in, but maybe not.
Oh, I do videos and stuff from there too.
Yeah, maybe it was that. I'm
just like
having this vivid memory. Like, I was at the beach with my kid, and then I saw this guy on the bench. Yeah,
there's only 3 of us down here, so clearly it
Oh
might have been me.
my
You got a 33% chance.
Oh my god. Okay.
I'm an idiot. I told you.
I mean, Edmund's facts, though, we're turning the tables, but it is what it is, and that's why I was like, Richard, you have important work to do here and in the whole world, so please stay here. And I think his wife is on my side as well.
She definitely is.
We love you. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to be able to hang out in person. Let's all hang out. I want to hang out for sure. And I will hit you up about, important future decisions in my life soon.
Absolutely. Love y'all too. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to this episode of The Coast. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. This episode's music was provided by Sloan Best.
And editing provided by Kayla Shu.